So basically, we are going to be talking this week about what constitutes a good transfer or a bad transfer. And Leeds seem to have been gathering a bunch of quite talented under-23s who were popular picks last season, and they've all gone to the SO5 graveyard in the sky. So what we thought would be really interesting is, when you talk about Sorare and you talk about transfers, there always tends to be a gut feeling around what makes a good transfer or a bad transfer from an SO5 perspective. So we're going to use some examples today, talk through some players that have had an off-season transfer, and explain our thinking around why we believe it's either a good or a bad transfer. The first one up is Brenden Aaronson, who's one of the three players that we're going to be talking about that has joined Leeds this summer. I think I'll hand over to you now, Josh, because I know you watched a lot more Salzburg than I did last season. But Aaronson's that first one. I think he was actually the first of the three to sign for Leeds as well. So
yes,
let's get into it and talk a little bit more about why we think this is a terrible move for him from an SO5 perspective.
Yeah. Okay. So Brenden Aaronson is a sort of tricky SO5 midfielder. If you look at his graph, he has quite a few really quite bad scores, and I think it's probably due to the fact that obviously Salzburg quite heavily rotated, especially towards the end of last season. He didn't start too many games, had a slight injury as well. But then there's swathes of the earlier season as well, where he's sort of punching 50s and 40s and 30s, etc. And this is down to his game being reasonably decisive dependent when it comes to SO5. So when you look at the peak scores that he does have, and he does have some decent peak scores, he bombs over 70 a reasonable amount when he scores a goal or gets an assist. And because of how many goals and assists he gets at Salzburg, it still makes him a viable U23 option. He's hit an 88 back in game week 226. And then a bunch of other 70 scores across the season as well. And this just comes down to him needing decisive actions to be able to score well on the SO5 matrix. And when we look at how many decisives Salzburg get, or in this sense, actually just how many goals they should score, they should be getting about 2.5 goals a game based on their XG. I think their XG per 90 is 2.3-ish. And then also, their players, should tend to get a lot more assists as well. So I think then when you move Aaronson into a Leeds setting, he's not going to be taking a particularly strong AA game with him. He doesn't do a lot defensively. He's a very hard-working number 10. I think he covered the most ground per game in Austria last year. So, he really bombs about the pitch and sticks himself about. But he's not amazing in the tackle. He's not a physical presence. He's a very hardworking midfielder that invades space. He gets into areas in the box, puts himself in positions and makes smart passes. The issue with moving to Leeds is he's going to have less time to do that offensively, and he's going to be working more defensively to try and keep other teams out than try and impose himself on the opposition goal. So Leeds XG per 90 is only 1.5, so you're taking off basically a whole expected goal per game for Leeds to score, and this is going to have a viable impact on his decisive actions when he's playing for Leeds. If you take a good chunk of those DAs away, he got 15 DAs last season. It's probably going to be looking like half of that when he's at Leeds, and that just really does obliterate his scores. So yeah, I think that would be, that is quite clearly a bad transfer for the prospective DA hunting of Aaronson. He's not going to be getting as many based on the numbers that we expect for Leeds and Salzburg theoretically to score goals. And therefore, that's going to see a decline in his SO5 scoring. Do you have anything to add there, mate?
Well, what I find really interesting, and I've just brought it up on screen now for those watching the video recording, but what I find really interesting is the market's reaction to some of these transfers. Like, one of the wildest ones I saw recently was Di Maria pumping in price on his transfer to Juventus, where I'm like, does his role change really? I think he's still going to be a rotation player. He's not going to start every game. But what I thought was really odd here is there was actually quite a significant, quite a significant price pump for Aaronson when the Leeds transfer was confirmed. And I just find that wild. Like, I get he's an under 23, but I just, like, for all those reasons that you said, there's several red flags for me in terms of, he could have a good season at Leeds, but Salzburg is genuinely an excellent place for young players to be playing. So I just don't see how in any way he gets close to his scores from last season. So I find the market reaction to him particularly odd, I will admit.
Yeah, that is. I mean, even when you zoom out even further, I was looking at like a year long. But yeah, that is quite strange, isn't it? That there's obviously a dip in his price when like the rumours of him going to Leeds, and then when it's actually confirmed, it rises a little bit, which is, I think that is very odd. I can't really see why. I mean, you're not playing him in Champion Limited, are you? You're just going to get absolutely roasted. I mean, what? Yeah, I don't see what you're planning to do with him there, unless you're buying in.
I don't see where you can trust him. Like, to be honest, like, he's not going to be strong enough for Champion, and in under 23, I think there's going to be significantly better options. And are you paying the price that's currently being asked for him, to play in maybe the 5 or 6 games a season that Leeds have a really favourable matchup? Like, I personally wouldn't be.
Or like American men's national teams. Again, like, why, I don't see why people would be doing that. That seems crazy.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. All right then. Well, we've talked about one attacking player that's gone to Leeds. How about a defensive one? Because I think, again, we've got some real similarities in the fact that he's joined from the same team.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Rasmus Kristensen is obviously the next guy. And yeah, Salzburg did leak the odd goal last year, but he is still going to get a good amount from clean sheet points as well, playing for Salzburg, which he is not going to get playing at Leeds. They're going to concede a bucket load of goals. And I sort of think like Stuart Dallas is quite a good comparison when it comes to SO5 scoring to Rasmus Kristensen. A player, although Dallas sort of plays everywhere, but when he's playing fullback, a player for Leeds that's going to be very active up and down the flank, trying to get as involved as possible in the box. Kristensen is a very offensive-minded fullback, and he's really going to be trying to, bomb into the box, etc. And you can see where he hits his peak scores for Salzburg, he either gets a decisive action, or they're playing a weak side, and he is able to basically camp on the edge of the 18-yard box of the opposition and put in crosses, etc. I think what's especially worrying about Kristensen is that he still had some very low scores playing for Salzburg, especially in some of their wins, just because of the SO5 matrix so heavily penalising possession loss and duel loss. So I think that is really concerning because, again, if you move that to Leeds, I'm not quite sure what sort of system Marsh is going to play, but I imagine they're going to be playing a similar sort of pressing, high intensity game under him, especially with the signings that he's brought in. And yeah, this could really lead to Kristensen being pinched in some tricky positions and giving the ball away, similar to that he did at Salzburg. The issue is that this is going to happen more frequently than at Salzburg, and at Salzburg it was happening a lot already. Because of how Jason likes to play a high tempo style, and also he's not going to get as many decisive actions to back it up. He scored I think the joint second most goals in Europe as a defender last year, and also had a couple of assists. And he even took a couple of penalties last year, which obviously he's not going to do at Leeds. So in fact, I think he might have missed them both. So maybe that's a good thing for his SO5 scoring, that he's not taking the penalties. But yeah, the thing with him is, again, if you look at someone like Stuart Dallas on Sorare data, there's really not too much good to be said about his scores, and it is because he's heavily penalised in possession and duel loss. So he had a L15 of 44, an L40 of 47, and I think, to be honest, if I'd be surprised if Kristensen got those sort of numbers. Any thoughts on him, mate?
Completely agree with you, to be honest. I think as well that's interesting at this one is the market seems to agree as well. If you look at his pricing over time, when he went on a bit of a run of good scores in February was his peak, yep. And he's not got anywhere close to that since. So again, it's one of those players that I just wonder where you're going to use him. He's not under 23 anymore. He's certainly not going to score well enough for you to be able to compete in Champion Europe. And if you're looking for a threshold type player, do you want to use Champion Europe players, play the premium for them to run at thresholds? I think he's probably, even at his Salzburg days, he would have been far too inconsistent to be a threshold player. So I think he's a bit lost, to be honest. Like if I had him, I don't think I'd be confident to put him in the lineup each week.
Yeah, I was just going to say, he's exactly the opposite of what you want from a threshold chaser, isn't he? He's either going to score a decent amount when he has a decisive, which is obviously great, but looks like, more from my point of view anyway, more often than not, he's going to be scoring 20s or 30s basically with the negative actions, really putting a pinch on his score, I think.
There you go. He's a player for specialist. You heard it here first. Someone's going to win Specialist Limited in 3 months with Rasmus Kristensen and going to give us absolute stick on Twitter. But yeah, I think honestly, that's probably the only place you'd really use him at the moment.
Yeah.
I think his L15 at the moment is 43. So give him 5 games at Leeds, and I think he'll be sat firmly under that last 15 of 40 points threshold that you need for specialists. So. Maybe that's it. You heard it here first. Rasmus Kristensen, permanent specialist player for next season.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, amazing. Next up in the, opening up with 3 players that have transferred to Leeds is Lewis Sinisterra, who currently has an L5 of 63 and an L15 of 64.
Wow, I did not realise he was that elite, by the way.
He was incredible last season. Honestly, he's one of my big regrets. I look back, and someone told me a while back that you could go back and look at all of the auctions that you've bid on. And in my very first week on Sorare, a couple of the players that I targeted, one of them was Sinisterra, who was injured at the time, but I'd seen enough about in his stats to think, actually I might grab one of these. I bid 0.127. And I think the next bid was like 0.13 something, and I went, "Oh,
too much."
You know what? That's a little bit too much. I might just have to pass here. Like, I don't. But my logic was, I don't want to spend all of my ETH on one player. So then I got I think like Roman Evgeniev of Dynamo Moscow, who at the time was doing quite well, but really hasn't gone anywhere since. And yeah, one of my big regrets was seeing Sinisterra go charging past 1 ETH when he was fit, thinking probably should have bid again on that one. But I will be honest in saying I am certainly not going to be bidding on one now. Well, not that I can, because he's no longer coming through auction, but I'm not looking to be rushing to the secondary market to grab a Sinisterra. He is still under 23, which sort of does give him a bonus. He is a forward. So, he's going to be less impacted by the possession loss playing in a stronger team. The real one for me is decisives. You mentioned it earlier about the difference between Salzburg's expected goals per game and Leeds. There's a drop from Feyenoord. Feyenoord, albeit they were slightly better than Leeds, not as good as Salzburg, but for me, Feyenoord were a team that, 80% of the matches, I think it's fair to say, like probably 80% of the matches they went into last season, they were favourites.
Yeah.
There's very few, you think of like Ajax, PSV, Roma, a couple of the games they played in the Europa Conference League where they weren't favourites, but a lot of the time they dominated the ball. There were plenty of chances. Sinisterra was able to grab some really good AA and build up. Yeah. And I just don't like Leeds aren't going to play the same way. Leeds is going to be pressing. They're going to be looking to force a turnover and move quickly. They are not going to be possession dominant. They're also not going to go into more than 50% of the games in the season as favourites. So I find it very, very, very hard to believe that Sinisterra will be able to match his output in terms of decisives last season, goals and assists. He could end up next season. He could like the ceiling for him is, can he replicate Rafinha's scores?
Yeah.
But for me, you look at the amount of decisives he got last season. It was so regular, as is shown and demonstrated by his scores. I honestly think that if Sinisterra gets like 10 decisives next season for Leeds, that will be like a good season for him. Like Leeds could consider that to have been a successful signing. Like that could be him doing well for Leeds and being a player that plays regularly, but I just don't see him matching the decisive output of Feyenoord, and then as a result, that just that takes him out from that elite bracket into that. I still think he's usable, but I don't think he's not like you can rely on him. Like people last season were putting Sinisterra and Khvicha in their team every single week, knowing that they were probably going to be in the mix for a T1 or above.
Yeah,
but you can't do that this season because he's just not going to get as many decisives. So I think of all the three, he's got the best chance of like doing well, but well isn't excellent and well isn't elite. And his price last season, his scores last season was elite. What I still find a bit crazy is his limited has dropped a little bit. His rare has dropped as well, but he's still commanding the last sale. What's this? A couple of days ago, 0.82. That's still a big chunk of change for a player that I don't think can be relied on every game. Like there'll be certain games next season. Like don't get me wrong, I think he could really put the beat down on teams like Everton. But 0.8 ETH for a player that you can't rely on week in, week out, that's too much for me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I wouldn't be paying 0.8 for Sinisterra. I think it must be some lovely DGen Leeds fans. Ah, yes. Love the Leeds. Yeah, what was that? 0.88. Wow, okay. I don't know if Granjos, who was the last sale, is also a Leeds fan, but I think that can be the only reason you're buying him at 0.8, to be honest.
It's probably the only explanation for it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really? Right. Okay. On to the next one. Castellenos. Well, I think this one is universally. Well, I said I thought this was universally understood to be a bad transfer, but for some reason, what has happened here? Absolutely wild. Like if you're listening on the audio only stream, Tati Limited dropped from 0.2 to 0.1 ETH and is now rebounded back up to 0.15.
But it's happened with the rare as well.
Who is doing this? Like, I mean, you joked about DGen Leeds fans. We've got a bunch of DGen Girona fans out here because this is, in my mind, absolute insanity. Like, how his rare is still commanding 0.5, 0.57, so like almost 0.6 is absolutely beyond me. Like, Tati is going from a free scoring league where he was playing at one of the strongest teams, and by the way, still overperforming his expected goals quite significantly, to a newly promoted club in La Liga where the average goals per game is significantly less. I just like this transfer reminds me of one we had last summer, which was Ricardo Pepi. Like Ricardo Pepi absolutely ripped up in the MLS. He went to Augsburg and hasn't been heard from since. Like it's just like to put into context, like the jump from MLS to Europe is huge. Like Pepi in MLS was averaging 0.51 expected goals and assists per game. The moment he went to the Bundesliga, that dropped to 0.2. Like the drop off is huge, and when you pull that into like what impact that has on the amount of goals they score, that's massive. And I'd argue that the Bundesliga is an easier league to score in than La Liga is.
Yeah.
And Augsburg are a better quality team relative to the league than Girona are. Like, I just like this one baffles me. Like, if I was a Tati owner, which I'm not, like I would have been out the moment that there was a sniff of this. Like Tom Bogert reported it, and he's a very, very he's a reputable journalist for the MLS. Like the moment that he got wind of it, I would have been out. Like I cannot fathom how his price has rebounded in the last couple of days. Like, are you really spending 0.6 ETH to get one game out of him versus Inter Miami? Because if so, you've got too much money, and that's just pure insanity.
I think the Pepe comparison is really good, actually, because like if you look at Ricardo Pepe's all-time graph, obviously there's a period where he's mostly a bench player, scoring 25s or 60s if he scores off the bench. But then obviously he breaks into the team and starts hitting these 70s, 80s, 90, even on one occasion on a semi-regular basis. And he moves to Augsburg and he hasn't scored higher than 46. And that was a Costa Rican game.
That was the US. Yeah, he's barely gone over 30 at Augsburg.
So yeah, 45 is his highest score whilst he's been at Augsburg. And I can just see that it seems like a carbon copy, like you say, with Tati.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think Tati's been a very, very good player in the MLS, and I think it's honestly it's a real shame for his career that basically from what I've read, it seems to be that City Football Group were expecting a big offer for him. That offer has never come in, and I think the pain for any Tati holders is he was linked with Club Brugge and River Plate for quite long periods of this summer, and everyone's like, yeah, no, keep hold of him. He could get a good move. And then out of nowhere, City Football Group have gone, you know what, we're just going to move him to Girona, and that's just oof. The pain on that one is it's real feels.
Absolutely.
But anyway, I'm not going to continue to upset owners of Tati Castellanos. I'm going to move on to the next player, and the next one again. I want to sort of preface this. I think this player is a good player. I just cannot make sense of their current price. Over to you, Josh. Why is Khvicha holding 1.2 ETH for a rare? The floors, I'm not even going to talk about the floor because it's so embarrassingly high. But the last sale for this player was 1.2 ETH. Who are you? Because I really want to understand your logic here. That's just wild to me.
Yeah, when you told me that, I presumed that this was weeks ago. But this is only 10 days ago, this last sale in Rare.
This is a pre-season form pump, if ever I've seen it. I'm pretty sure we could check Khvicha, and he's banged in a couple of goals in a friendly against a Serie B team, and everyone's jumped on the bandwagon. But I tell you what, dropping 1.2 ETH on a player that does not really have an AA game is moving to a stronger league is wild. I think people look at it and go, oh, he's going to replicate Insigne's scores because he's playing on the left wing, without just understanding of the difference between a midfielder and a forward card and how they score. If Khvicha was a forward card, I wouldn't say it's a dead transfer. I still would be questioning 1.2 ETH for it. Yeah. But as a midfielder card, I just cannot get my head around it at all. I really can't.
Yeah, and that he averages the most, or he averaged in his last full season with Rubin the most dribbles per game in Europe, I believe. And yeah, this, like you've quite rightly said, this is really good when you have forward cards because they get the points for the take-ons. I think it is Tekkers that obviously I think, or it's what's the actual thing they use on Sorare? Contest one, right? Sorry. So yeah, so they get the points for contest one when they dribble around a player. He averages he averaged for Rubin 16 dribbles a game or something. So he was doing that quite a lot. And they don't get 0.5 possession loss like you do on a midfielder when they lose the ball trying to take somebody on. They only get 0.1. So this, I think, is why there's if he was a forward, he might be still semi-usable, yes. But the thing about Khvicha is he's a very tricky winger. He takes his man on. He comes inside. He shoots towards the back stick. So he's like a bit of a slower, trickier version of Iron Robin, basically. And you can see from his score graph here that the big green scores that he's had in the last games that he's played have been for Georgia, playing in a central role. For them, he plays behind the 9 or as a 9, basically, depending on what system they're playing. And he's playing against Gibraltar there and still manages to only pick up 14 AA. And that's with a goal and an assist. So he's got at least some shot on target points there as well. So, and the reason, it's a bad transfer at Rubin, he's the main man. Everything goes through him. He gets to dribble at people as much as he likes. He gets to do whatever he likes with the ball. When he's moved to Napoli, he suddenly has defensive liability. He has the liability that he can't be a ball hog, essentially. He's not going to average 16 dribbles a game at Napoli. If he's, coming in to play left wing for them, his AA game is going to be even less than what it is now, right? He's not going to have any or as many take on points. And he might not get the ball so much that he might not lose it so much. But really, that's what his game is taking people on and creating chances and scoring opportunities. So I think this is wild. And I was looking at his limited price graph as well, because I thought, maybe that is slightly more toned down. But, people are playing 0.23 today. And, for a U23 million limited, that gets you some serious bang for your buck.
Absolutely. I mean, Khvicha, just for context here, Khvicha, being the main man at Rubin, in the last year has averaged 8.6 points AA. And that's with this pump of his high peaks of AA of 14 points when absolutely crushing on Gibraltar in the Nations League. It's wild to me. I don't know if people are seeing the scores that he's put in the Nations League and think that he's just going to average that every game, but he's not going to get a decisive every game in Serie A. No way. It's never going to happen. And if you look at the most expensive midfielders, if you look at under 23 midfielders, the ones that maintain their price are the ones that have a good AA game.
Yeah.
You look at players like Kochu last season, Koop Miners the season before, the players that are elite under 23 mids are usually ones that play more centrally, have more control over the ball, and play in a weaker league. I just cannot see how Khvicha holds his current price, because in my mind it's 2, maybe even 3 times more than it should be.
To put it into context, if you compare him to champion midfielders, he's in the top 20 champion midfielders on price. His price is the top 20 on last sale, which, to say that there's not 20 better SO5 champion Europe midfielders just seems, mind-boggling, ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely mad. I think there's a huge element of recency bias to this. I think people have got excited by his recent scores and really, really not considered the difference of, Khvicha playing for Napoli against Inter and Juve versus Khvicha playing for Georgia against Gibraltar. I
think it must be a scarcity thing. There's only 27 rares. I just don't see why you'd hunt one if I just don't see why you'd hunt one. To put it into context, I think
Georgian fans.
Yeah, yeah. I think Dejan Kulusevski is a good comparison for Khvicha. And he ran like the absolute sun towards the end of last season. And Tottenham have signed Richarlison, and there's sort of semi-doubts about how included Kulusevski is going to be in their front three. But I'm sure we can probably say the same about Khvicha at Napoli. But he's selling, just to set the record straight, I do not think Kulusevski is going to be a good SO5 player this season. Again, mainly for the reasons we've mentioned. He's incredibly decisive, dependent, and he's a midfielder card, not a forward. But he is selling for 0.4 less or 0.3 less than Khvicha. He's got nearly 100 more.
Of the price.
Yeah, he's got nearly 100 more cards. So that, maybe it is just that. But if you're looking for I'm presuming you're not looking for a U23 mid when you're buying Khvicha. But I don't know. Maybe you are.
I've got some really rare cards that score terribly. If anyone wants to drop one each my way, so please do let me know. I can sell Ozan Tufan one each. Send me the offer, immediately accepted. The card is incredibly rare. And
getting 46 games of utility this season.
Absolutely is. As Hull get promoted. bit of a reach, that one, isn't it? Anyway, on to our next two players that are bad, in my opinion, bad transfers. I'm probably going to take a bit of stick on some of these. So anyway, let's get stuck in. Without any further ado, Vitor Ferreira, Vitinha. I'm going to call this as a bad transfer, even though he is going to PSG. I think what's happened here is everyone has got quite excited about the idea of running a PSG under 23.
U23 stacks, baby. Oh yeah.
That is it. I think, you know, his price. I mean, let's have a look at it. Like, yeah, it's been steadily climbing, hasn't it? Like, or not so steadily in
rare. Yeah.
In rare. Jesus, he's 2 ETH now almost.
Crikey.
You know, what's the most recent purchase? 1.74 ETH. That is a ton of money for a guy who has not yet proven himself outside of Portugal. You know what? I'm not sure if many people have followed his career before dropping on the best part of 2 ETH on him, but he did a season in the Premier League at Wolves and did not perform terribly well. I mean, I can hear people shouting at the screen now saying, "Come on, mate, PSG are much better than Wolves," and yes, I agree they are. But what I think is really, really important to think about here is that Vitinha did not get many decisives last season at Porto. He only got less than 5. His scores were predominantly driven by interceptions and passes. And what's really interesting is if you look at the number of passes that he put out last season in Portugal, that dropped when he played in the Champions League, and that dropped when he played in the Nations League for Portugal. So, he was averaging almost 60 passes a game in Portugal, and that dropped to close to 50 in internationals, Champions League, and basically any tournament with slightly stronger opponents. So there's a really interesting point here, and what I think is always valuable to consider when assessing the impact of players that play in Portugal is, in Portugal you have 3 incredibly dominant clubs. You've got Sporting Club Portugal, you've got Benfica, you've got Porto. They are like leagues ahead of every other club in this country. And what tends to happen when any one of these 3 teams are playing another team in the league, then the opposition tend to sit back and try and absorb pressure, and it's more about, I don't want to lose rather than I want to win. And those are essentially perfect conditions for Vitinha to sit at the base of the midfield, spray passes around, pick up AA points. Kind of to a lesser effect, the way that you saw Ajax defenders churn AA points last season, because the opposition strikers were not putting any pressure on them whatsoever. What has happened when Vitinha has played against stronger opposition is he's had less time on the ball and he's had less opportunity to make passes. The other question I really have is him and Verratti. Like, I don't know about you, Josh, but do you I feel like him and Verratti are too similar for them to work in a 3-4-3. Yeah. You could look at that and say, okay, well, actually, then that's a positive thing, because if he can displace Verratti, then he's got decent upside and he could be that guy at the base of the midfield. But for me, I think for the 3-4-3 formation that they've been rolling out to work, you really need someone a little bit more dynamic to partner either Vitinha or Verratti to sort of really make that formation work. So I don't see him as a lock starter at this stage. I get that Verratti's injury record is abysmal, and he's probably going to miss 50% of the season. But paying 2 ETH for a player that might it has a rotation risk, I think that's quite a lot for me. I think the conditions around the passing. Another really interesting stat as well is that Vitinha was on set pieces at Porto, and Porto, one way to really easily churn AA for a midfielder is if they get corners. You get a corner and you can connect with a target man striker in the box, as Gil and Buxer did all last season. It's just easy points. So what was interesting is Porto, and this is a sort of a byproduct of the way teams play against them, but Porto averaged 6.5 corners per game last season, and PSG only averaged 3. So there's a big drop-off in terms of the number of opportunities he's going to have to pick up easy points, if he even gets set pieces, because there's definitely going to be more competition for them in PSG than there will be at Porto. So I think it's a slightly different way of looking at it as a potential bad transfer, but I just think there's a lot of question marks around his ability to perform at this level, potential rotation risks, like role within the team. It's just a number of red flags for me here that make me wonder, is the 2 ETH purchases that we're seeing just simply people dreaming of running a full PSG stack with the newly confirmed number 1 Donnarumma, or is it sort of more of a I believe in this player and I think he's going to have a very good season.
Yeah, going on the corners as well. Like Porto have got 6'2" monster Mehdi Taremi in the box, haven't they?
You're not going to get Mbappe up winning it against the big men in
Mbappe and Messi. Yeah, I'm not so sure. I mean, obviously, if Ramos plays and Marquinhos, they could get involved. But yeah, there's just going to be less bodies to aim at, isn't there?
Absolutely. And again, I think, honestly, I think Vitinha is a good player. I just think that there's a lot of uncertainty for the price tag that he's currently fetching.
Sure.
The next one, and this is the one that's probably going to upset a lot of people, but Robert Lewandowski to Barcelona.
I'm so with you on this as well. Good.
I'm so glad, because I put this into our pre-pod notes, and I thought, if ever there's one that I'm going to take heat on, it's going to be this man. But I'm going to stick with this. I really am. I think Lewandowski is a truly excellent player. His goal scoring record of the last couple of seasons has been absolutely incredible, but on SA5, he really needs a goal, and he needs lots of goals to get a good score. His average AA, despite the fact that he's been ripping 30-plus goals a season for Bayern, and is basically on the end of every chance, his average AA is 9.2. He only touches the ball to get a shot on target or a big chance miss. So if big chance miss gets removed from the matrix, we might be having to pump Leo up a little bit. But he really does get hit by big chance miss. And the one thing that I'm just going to have to get stuck into is Bundesliga tax is real. We're just going to get straight there, because Barcelona are not as good as they used to be. They are getting better, but they are not as dominant as Bayern are in Germany. Just to put this into context, last season, Bayern's average expected goals per game was 2.93. Barcelona was 1.85. And Barcelona was still one of the strongest teams in La Liga. La Liga average goals per game is 2.5. Bundesliga is 3.1. Bundesliga is an easier league to score in. It really is. And what I've tried to do is I actually looked at some data of players that have transferred directly from the Bundesliga to La Liga in the last 5 seasons. And what I wanted to do, and albeit it's a very small sample, but what I was really interested to look at is how does the expected goals and assists change when they played in the Bundesliga versus when they played in La Liga. So first one up is Jovic, who went from Frankfurt to Real Madrid. Just for context, these are all adjusted per 90 minutes, because I can hear people shouting already that Jovic didn't really play at Real Madrid, May. Well, in this first season, he actually did. He had a fair run of games, but his expected goals and assists per 90 in the Bundesliga was 0.69. In La Liga, it was 0.62. For Alexander Sorloth, who went from RB Leipzig to Real Sociedad, his expected output dropped from 0.54 per game to 0.47. And the last player to move directly from Bayern Munich to Barcelona, albeit in a different position, was Philippe Coutinho, who his expected output dropped from 0.72 to 0.65. So all in all, across those three players, there was an 11% drop in expected production when moving from the Bundesliga to La Liga. Like the data supports the claims that the Bundesliga is an easier league to score in. And if you look at Lewandowski, who is basically scores or he's useless, like he is an absolute like team breaker if he doesn't score, because his AA is frankly trash for a forward. Like he's going to find it harder to score in La Liga. He's in a new team. This is the thing. Like he could still score a bucket load of goals in La Liga next season. Like he could still score 20 goals next season, but he was scoring 30 plus in Bundesliga. So by that logic, I just don't think he maintains his output, and I think it's a bad transfer. I think if you look at it, I think his price is held. There's been if you look in ETH, there's been a slight increase recently based on the changing fluctuation rates, but his price has started to rise as the new season has come about. And honestly, I think a lot of his price was because of the stacking potential, that you could basically play him every week and know that most weeks Bayern were going to absolutely crush.
Yep.
Like that's just not going to be the same at Barcelona. So I think when you look at 3.5 ETH, which is where he is now, that's a big chunk of change for a champion forward, particularly one with no AA game. So I stand by it. I think Lewandowski is a bad transfer for SO5.
Yeah, I do. I agree with you on this one. I think I still think Lewandowski is going to be a good SO5 player, not like a bad SO5 player next season. I think he's still going to be good. Do I think he's going to be as good as the season we've just had? No, for the reasons you've mentioned. He's not going to score as many goals, in my opinion. He's not going to get as many DAs. And when Bayern play the really bad teams, they absolutely crucify them. And so he gets hat-tricks, right? Some of these scores, he is getting multiple decisives a game. When they played Salzburg in Europe, he got 4 DAs and 100 in one game. Played Köln away from home, scored a hat-trick. There's loads of these instances. And is that, I just don't, he will score a hat-trick next season or what have you, but I just don't think his DA output is going to be the same as it was this year. And for that, I don't think he's going to be a bad SO5 player, but I do think he's going to be worse than what he was at Bayern.
Absolutely, I agree. I still think he's going to be usable. And the thing with Lewandowski as well is he is an elite forward, so he outperforms his expected goals because he is better than average. The point when I reference expected goals data is purely like he's not going to have as many chances to score at Barcelona as he is at Bayern Munich. And that's why I think that you will ultimately see a drop in his production. Just the simple fact that Bayern are that much better than most of the other teams in the league.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so we're in agreement on that. After basically a good half an hour of doom and gloom, we are going to flip it around and talk about what constitutes a good transfer.
Let's move into some good ones. I like it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest, quite a lot. I think collectively we own every player on this list because that's how excited we are about these transfers. It's not simply a pump cast. It's more about explaining the rationale and the reasons why we've got excited by these players. And the first one is Szymanski. And looking at that price chart, I'd suggest we're not the only ones that are getting excited about this.
Look at that graph. That's wild.
His price pretty much doubled within a week on Limited as a result of this news breaking. I think, when we talked about Tati earlier in the show, of Tati just had nothing but good potential transfers until Girona. I think it was the opposite for Szymanski. The whole summer, it was he's going to go to Hertha Berlin, or he's going to go to a lower end Bundesliga club, and everyone's like, oh god, that's horrible. And then suddenly he's on his way to Feyenoord, and I and many others degened in. But I'm really, really hoping that I think he's gone like literally overnight from being a card that nobody really wanted to being in the discussion for a sort of top 5, top 10 under 23 mid this season. I mean, I know you watched quite a bit of him at Dynamo last season, so you can give a little bit more context on his style of play and sort of why we think he could do well.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, at Dynamo, he's basically given a free role just to run around in the 10 essentially. He had supporting midfield players like Dan Famin around him. He had Arsene Zakharyan on one side, and then a much weaker left-hand side with like Lesovoy or Makarov, and then obviously Fedor Shmolov to play off up front. So yeah, he was given free range to sort of dictate the orchestra essentially at Dynamo, keep them ticking over, wandered into a lot of free spaces in and around the left fullback. So yeah, drifted over to the wide right to link up with Zakharyan a bit closer and play a lot of diagonal and through passes towards Smolov. But yeah, and it's just such a nice spot for him to move into at Feyenoord, where Feyenoord had Till last year making some sort of like Lampard-esque runs basically into the box to score goals. I think surely the plan is this time around to use Szymanski as a facilitator and basically just run the offense through him, similar to what he did at Dynamo. It's almost, I'm not going to compare him to Carles Gil in like a SO5 scoring world because obviously, Gil is still the GOAT. But he, it is quite Gil-like in the way that he accumulates AA by key passes, taking set pieces, etc. And yeah, mostly through offensive development. So yeah, I would expect him to have a similar role in Feyenoord, being like a pure 10 and dictating the offense for them basically.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's a really really exciting move for him. I think when we talk about leagues that are easy to score goals in,
yes.
Eredivisie's one of the only leagues with a higher average goals per game than Bundesliga. I appreciate that Ajax are most of those goals, but I still think that Feyenoord and PSV in particular really do give them a run for the money. And you do see games where these clubs can smack 4 or 5 goals past some of the lower teams in the Eredivisie. So I think he could be one that's very exciting. And I think it's one thing we've not necessarily talked about as much, but the midweek utility as well, which Feyenoord should have this season as well, being part of the European games.
Absolutely, yeah, and yeah, just going back to his AA, he in his last 40 games for Dynamo, he got 16 DAs, which is obviously still not bad, but he's not a decisive, reliant player. He's averaging 65 in the last 40 at Dynamo, and you don't get that. To put that into. We've just talked about Robert Lewandowski. I think he's got a similar L40, but he's got 43 decisives in that time. And I know they're different, completely different players, completely different ends of the spectrum. But it just shows you how accomplished his AA game was at Dynamo and how good it could be at Feyenoord.
Absolutely. And I think that there was quite a lot of disruption, Dynamo towards the end of the season. And, he will have better players playing around him at Feyenoord. Yeah. I honestly still think that Feyenoord have got 1 or 2 big moves in them. They obviously got a fair chunk of change from selling Sinisterra. Obviously Till's no longer on their wages anymore. He was on loan last season. So I think I feel like they've got another Szymanski I think is a big move. I think they've got another big move to bring in another forward, and I think that they could be very exciting, giving that sort of free roaming 10 role that he played at Dynamo Moscow. I think he could be very exciting. And, when we look at the sort of tale of 2 players that have moved from the RPL, Khvicha is averaging less than 10 points AA a game. We look here, Szymanski is averaging almost 17. So, there's a real big difference in, that how the players score points. And, I think in under 23s in particular, having a player that can go 50 points without a decisive helps keep you in the mix.
Very valuable.
Which is really, really valuable. Absolutely. So talking of midweek utility and under 23, next up is Jens Odgaard, who I couldn't not talk about after his absolutely astounding performance last night in his first game for AZ Alkmaar. won a penalty, and I think he put up a fairly tasty AA game as well. Yeah, he did 16 points.
Lots of shots on target. Yeah.
Absolutely, he does. He absolutely loves a shot. Does this lad? I have seen him. This isn't my own pump, but I have seen him described on Twitter before as the Danish Robin van Persie. So I really am expecting loads from him this season. So I think, if we look here at his scores last year in a Welbeck team that, was, certainly not one of the strongest in the league, he performed very, very well. And that was in a team that, didn't have anywhere near the expected goals output that AZ Alkmaar had. What's really interesting about him is he's quite tall, but he's very mobile and is capable of playing either through the middle or wide. And I think if AZ can keep just the Carlson, the Carlson, Odgaard, Pavlidis forward line could be really, really something quite special next season in the Eredivisie. I'm really quite excited. I think all of those sort of players building a connection, feeding off each other. I think that we could see AZ score a bucket load of goals next year. And I think that evolution from being the main man in a weaker team to being part of a really what could honestly be one of the best forward lineups in the league outside of Ajax. I for one am really, really excited about it. I know you watched him a couple of times last season, as a result of watching Ajax, but
yes.
What did you think of him? Did he sort of stand out for you?
Yeah, absolutely. He's just such a direct player, isn't he? And it's sort of showed winning the penalty for last night's game. He's really direct, and that obviously helps SO5 scoring. The more you get into the box, the more penalty area entries you get, the more shots you get away, which, you've mentioned, he really likes to do. I think he had a double-digit number of shots last night. How many did he have on target?
He had 3 on target, but I think
that seems a little light.
A debatable fourth that I think Opta should have scored. But...
Anyway, he had a lot. Gets into the box, has lots of shots on target, really drives into the box, so we'll get those one contests as well. I think he got a few last night, and that he did that against Ajax as well last year, and I think I seem to remember Welbeck got a result against them. I may well be waiting.
He got 2 assists against Ajax.
There you go. So but those are the only games I've watched him in, just because I watch all the Ajax fixtures, but they lost 3-2, didn't they? That's right. Ajax had a late comeback, if I remember correctly.
I think that was the week. Remember right back to this week, I got 412 points in Challenger. And I remember this game was really late in the game week. And I was thinking, 412 points, I'm on for a star here. This is my best ever score in Challenger. And then Ajax ripped a couple of late goals. Everyone had Tadic, and I ended up with a T2 for 412 points in rare. That really hurt. So I also watched that. I'm sure I watched that game mostly in agony, seeing my position in the Challenger leaderboard slowly slip away. But I remember he stood out in there again in that direct running. He's not afraid to take a man on, and I think that's just absolute AA gold for a forward, someone that's willing to commit someone. Drawing fouls as well. That's another one of those sort of meta points accumulators for a forward. So someone that's willing to dribble, someone's willing to cut into the box, take a shot. If he can maintain double-digit AA next season when playing for AZ, I think he's going to be a very, very good player, because I think he's definitely going to get the chance of decisives.
Yeah, no, definitely agree.
Okay, cool. On to the next one then. So from players that are scoring goals to players that are aiming to keep them out. This is to the Russian league.
Yes, this one I'm very excited about, actually. So I did pick up a rare on the back of some intel that he was moving to Zenit. So for those listening or watching, Rodriguez has moved from Sochi last year to Zenit St. Petersburg this year. And this is just a fantastic transfer. And don't get me wrong, Sochi aren't a bad defensive team, and you can see that from his historic scores. He scores very well historically for Sochi, and some of the DAs he got maybe mainly more down to Noboa's delivery than him actually being superior in the air, although he is very good aerially. But he did score a couple of goals from corners, I think, last season. And if we think about the defenders that score really well in the game, your Lissandro Martinez, your Jurriën Timber, the two Ajax guys, obviously. And then, the champion ones, the defenders for Bayern Munich, etc. But I suppose what I'm saying is that at Zenit, he's going to get more opportunity to be advanced higher up the pitch and therefore spray lots more passes about, essentially. At Sochi, and he played in the middle of a back three, and he might well get to do that for Zenit again this year as well. But because they're going to be so much higher up the pitch than Sochi were, although, like I say, Sochi are no bad team, he's going to have more chance to dominate teams on a better team like Zenit, whereas Sochi will dominate against maybe the bottom 4, 5, or 6 in the Russian league. Zenit dominate against every team in the Russian league, right? So I think, although maybe last week was not a very good example of this, but him moving to Zenit gives the potential for him to hit the real, top peak scores with keeping clean sheets, making passes, and then, bringing his defensive ability to the fore. Another thing that I think this is a good transfer is because Zenit themselves have improved so drastically over the summer. They've bought in Rodrigao himself, Matteo Cassiera as well from Sochi. They haven't lost. The only foreign player they've lost is Yuri Alberto, who went back to Brazil, and they got Cassiera as a direct replacement. They've also just recently got a new goalkeeper who may well be going into goal. So whilst Zenit have actually grown in strength over the off-season, the vast majority of the rest of the league have diminished in strength. And that just means that Zenit are going to be, essentially have an easier ride, be overpowered, in SO5. And yeah, the Rodrigao transfer, I'm very excited about, just to see how his AA game can, maybe even get even better. I think he could go from being like he did last season to like a Douglas Santos. I think they could be quite comparative this year.
He's definitely one that's capable of those peak scores. And I think, when we look at his price, I find it interesting. Like, it's moved a little bit, but, it's obviously moved a bit here in rare. It's moved more so in. This is what I find odd at the moment, is I'm seeing some cards that are moving more in rare than they are in limited, which I find baffling. Like, I appreciate there's a scarcity aspect to it, but I've always, sort of historically noted that, limited seems to have moved more so than rare. But, if we look here, his price has risen, but, he's still last sales around 1E. Admittedly, the floor's a little bit higher now, but I'm sure there's work to be done to negotiate down. That puts him in the elite territory. He's in the elite territory of scoring, but he's not crazily priced. Or the one we were talking about earlier was Cameron Carter-Vickers, who's currently holding 3 ETH. Like, is he 3 times the player that Rodrigao is? I don't think so. Is he going to put 3 times the amount of scores out? Hardly. Quite unlikely. So I think there's I don't know whether it's uncertainty. I've seen a lot of scaremongering around people just speculating that Opta won't cover Russia, but maybe that's keeping the prices down. But I think there's some players you look at in the RPL at the moment, and compared to other players within Challenger that score similarly, they definitely look on the more favourable side.
Yeah, no, I'd agree.
All right, so from RPL back to the Eredivisie with Owen Windal, who,
that's
should we try and make sense of what's gone on with this price? It's up and down like a yo-yo in the last couple of weeks. The limited market does not seem to know what to do with young Owen.
Yeah, I think this first spike here, I can't quite where it. Yeah, that one there, I can't quite see the date on it. Yeah, I think that must have been when he was reported as nearly signing, and then he's gone from. He had the period where he went then on preseason tour with Alkmaar, so he actually went on the plane with Alkmaar to their preseason tour, on the bus, wherever they were going. So I think that's probably why this plateaued and dipped a little bit. The Ajax rumours were still like, oh yeah, he's going to sign, but then he goes on preseason tour with AZ. And then, around this second spike here is probably where he's announced I'm imagining, and that's again why the prices rose. And then I'm guessing it's come back down again because they've signed Bassi as well, and people have seen that he also has played left back for Rangers, though I don't think Ajax have any intention of playing him at left back. So yeah, that's the only way I can make sense of this price graph, to be honest. But when we look
the rare market seems to be more mature in the sense that it's risen when he's been linked with Ajax, and then it's just stayed
held
at that sort of level since. So what we're basically saying is that the limited market is far more degen than the rare market, and
a lot more fickle for sure.
Yeah, fickle, absolutely. So what are you thinking about his scoring? Because his scoring was pretty respectable last season. He didn't peaks wise. What we're looking at last season, he only got 2 scores over 80 last season. So what are you thinking?
Yeah, so I think he did actually have quite a lot of decisive action. So he had 12 DAs, 11 assists last year, which was the most in the league by a defender, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I think what I hope to see from Wijndal, and why I think this is a very good transfer, is AZ last season played a lot of games on the counter-attack. They played a lot of games getting the ball wide into their wide areas with Carlson, with Wijndal, and trying to work the ball through those wide areas, which again, did sometimes lead to him having possession loss, duel loss, etc. So when he didn't get a decisive action last season, his AA game wasn't fantastic. And you can see again, even when he did get a DA, the amount of times that he hit 60 on the nose, he's got 60 on the nose 3 times with some negative AA scores. And then also a whole host of, 63, 62, 61 scores when, again, he's got the decisive action but hasn't really got much AA to back that up due to possession, duel loss, and the other negative factors surrounding fullbacks. Now, when you switch that to an Ajax perspective, who dominate the ball for large swathes of the game, he is going to be getting a lot more advanced up the pitch and racking up a lot more of those final third passes. This is the game he got his 100, right? So yeah, he just sort of crushed in all areas in that one.
Yeah, this is definitely the one you're looking at, isn't it? Like, Groningen would have been one of the few teams last season where AZ didn't need to play on the counter-attack because Groningen literally camp on the edge of their own box. And
exactly.
This I think is the simulation of what most games are going to be like for him at Ajax.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's it, right? You're going to be seeing him getting a lot more AA game from not giving the ball away so much because there's no need to do it. There's no need to try and play a long pass, etc. Getting into a lot more advanced areas because they're going to be higher up the pitch. And the one thing I thought was interesting is there's a guy on Twitter, Mark Lamberts, who's a data analyst that did some comparative piece on Owen Wijndal, and he compared him to 3 of, in his opinion, the best fullbacks in the league. So it was Daley Blind, Malacia, and Philip Max. Owen Wijndal and Daley Blind are 2 very different players. Blind is much more of a intelligent footballer, shall we say, whereas Wijndal is much, much more athletic. But if you look at the progressive runs and progressive passes and passes into the penalty area and passes into the final third on this graph, it can't just be that Daley Blind is, and he is very, very good at this. But what I'm saying is that if Owen Wijndal comes in and plays the same position, is that I would expect his numbers in those areas to increase massively as well, exponentially, potentially. And with that being the case, that's the one I'm after. So yeah, if you look at the left-hand side of this graph, where Wijndal is very weak because he wasn't getting that high up the pitch to play progressive passes or play passes into the opposition box. Really the only time he's playing passes into the opposition box is when he's bombed past Carlson and whipped across into the box, which did happen a lot. I'm not saying he's a very defensive fullback with AZ. I'm just saying is when they counter-attacked and he got involved, the chances he's putting the ball into the cross are his crosses, which he's got his assist from. But when we look at how you break down the SO5 scoring matrix, he's suddenly going to be picking up a lot more of these passes into the final third, key passes, even just completed passes and not losing possession. And I think that's where we can really see a real increase in his AA game for next season. And it's something I'm really quite excited about, to be honest. And yeah, he's still not going to be as an accomplished passer as Blind is, but it's going to be a hell of a lot better than it was at AZ, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It's the sort of changing role within the different teams. Ajax are far more patient in possession, and even though they've changed manager this summer, I still think that will be something that continues with them, in the sense that they are patient in possession. They're not, they're not a counter-attacking team, so it really does minimise that sort of leaking of points coming from crosses or ambitious balls over the top to someone trying to break in behind the defensive line. Like, the defensive lines against Ajax, the oppositions, always sit incredibly deep. So, you should get a lot more opportunity to get those sort of easy passes just on the edge of the final third, as we saw with Julian Timber last season.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Okay, awesome. So next up is our final player, and it's another player who we're hoping gets a bucket load of passes into the final third this season, is Taylor Harwood-Bellis. So unfortunately, the scarcity rule that we had around Khvicha does not seem to hold for THB, which does surprise me, because there really are not that many cards. Let's have a quicker look a second. How many cards are there? Just intrigued to see how many there is. Rare. Okay.
How many are actually in existence?
Yeah, there's not that many, because he only had a short run at Anderlecht before he went back on loan to Stoke.
46, isn't it?
46. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. So there's only 46 THB cards in existence at the moment, but his
44.
price,
Sorry.
44. Okay, his price since joining Burnley has barely moved. He's there at 0.4 ETH for an under 23 defender that is going to be reunited with Vincent Kompany. Like, he started the season, so let's just have a look, because he's quite an interesting one. So he started the season last year at Anderlecht on loan from Man City, and in all truth started the season very well. There's a bunch of sort of 65 plus 70 80 point scores, and then basically what happened, he seemed to get a bit homesick, and his loan was then terminated early. But what's happened is Vinny Kompany has gone from managing Anderlecht to managing Burnley, and one of the first players that he's tried to bring with him is Taylor Harwood-Bellis. What happened to him last season at Stoke is he ended up being shunted out, and they've got it down here mostly as centre-back. But I watched a few games last season for Stoke, and he ended up being shunted out to right back more often than not. And you see these games with negative or low AA. So this whole run here, Blackpool, Barnsley, Peterborough, not Peterborough, he came at centre back at Peterborough, against Cardiff, against Millwall. These were games when he was stuck at a right back, and he was basically told to do what Windar was doing at AZ, was bomb forward and whip across into the box, which for a player that has a very good range of passing was just completely wasteful. So what really excites me about him is, one, being reunited with a manager that trusts him and knows how to get the best out of him, and two, actually being played at centre back. He normally plays on the left side. Although he's right-footed, he's used to playing on the left side of a centre back pairing. So to shunt him out on right back just so you can accommodate Phil Jagielka was an absolute waste last season. It really was impacted on his scores. So I think he's one of these players. You look at how Kompany will set Burnley up. I think he's going to be looking to set up in a similar way as Anderlecht. He's going to be looking to build possession patiently. There's a bunch of scores here. If you look, this early days at Anderlecht, he's putting up 39 AA scores. He's very aggressive in the duel. He wins a lot of interceptions. He's averaging 70 odd passes a game here. That, for an under 23 defender, is pretty impressive. And I think the other thing as well is just the amount of games that Championship clubs get. Often people are paying more to get top club with midweek utility. Well, you get midweek utility with Championship teams, and the one kicker that I think really takes him to the next level is the potential stackability. We might have thought for the last 3 weeks that it was going to be Bart Verbruggen, and it looks like Burnley have done a hard pivot, and it now looks like it's going to be Arnett Muric, who's also joining from Man City. So you could get yourself a low mint, high fixture Burnley defensive stack that I honestly think could do quite a bit of damage in under 23 this season. I know it's a sensitive subject for you as a Verbruggen holder, Josh, but what do you think? Imagine it was Verbruggen signing for Burnley and not Muric. What would you think about THV as a potential stack partner for you then?
I just thought it was so odd that you were talking about Burnley as a patient possession building side. It just seems so alien to me, to be honest.
I know. They're really going to be shifting hard from the Dyche era.
Crazy. But no, I think
more is going to be a light with the sound of beautiful football next season. You heard it here first.
But no, I think this is a great move for Taylor Harbour-Bellis, to be honest. Like you say, he's obviously going to be reunited with a coach that I did wonder, like, if it was Company that terminated his loan, like he didn't like him. But from what I've read in the press and from Taylor Harbour-Bellis' comments, that is not the case. So it was literally that he did, he didn't want to be in Belgium anymore, essentially, which is fair enough. But no, I think it's a very good transfer. I think, like you say, he's going to be able to sort of dictate play a little bit, almost from building out from the back. And I think the great thing as well is that Cullen has come over from Anderlecht also, and it should be quite a strong. He's going to play sort of like a halfback role, isn't he, in front of the back four, pick the ball up from the back four. So I imagine Harbour-Bellis would feed him quite often, and he's not going to lose much possession doing that, and should be able to progress the ball quite nicely as well. So yeah, I think this is a nice one. Yeah, the stackability with Muric, like you say, a low mint, high fixture list as well is I think that could be key in some short midweeks especially, and I think that's a nice option to have.
What as well I think is interesting here is Harbour-Bellis was putting up big scores at Anderlecht when he wasn't the primary passer. Like Wesley Holt was the primary centre-back passer. When you look at his the passes that Harbour-Bellis put out, when he was putting out 70 passes a game, Holt was putting out like 90 to 100 in those same matches. So depending on who Burnley sign to play alongside him, it's not unrealistic to think that Company will try and use him in the way that Hope was used at Anderlecht, in the sense that he's playing on the left side of the centre-back partnership, and he's the one that really builds possession from the back. And I know you joke about it because it's very unlike Burnley to be associated with this style of play, but that is how Company likes to set his teams up. They should get a ton of possession, and they have a fairly tough opening run to the season, to be honest, like Huddersfield, Luton, Watford, Hull. After that, then it sort of pivots to Blackpool, Wigan, Millwall. I think, once they get settled, I think Burnley could actually play really well. And I honestly never in my life thought I would be talking up Burnley as a fantasy football asset. So here we are.
Oh, it's a crazy world we live in.
It is. Unless you have anything else to say, I think that draws us to the end of our Good Transfer, Bad Transfer podcast. If you have any other suggestions, if you disagree with any of the players that we have raised, good or bad, then please feel free to join the conversation and get involved. It's our opinions at the end of the day, but hopefully you've learnt a lot by listening today, and how we've broken down the thought process around what constitutes a good or a bad transfer.
Excellent. Thanks, mate.
Thank you very much.